Hi, this is Tom Soane, and this morning I just wanted to give you a few ideas on how you can still recover your rent even though the eviction ban has been extended again. And here's a warning for you as well. I think it's going to be extended again. So the current extension is taking us up to the 20th of September. I think they're doing it to protect the courts from being overloaded, overwhelmed with the number of cases that are backlogged and also the number of cases that are going to be submitted. So I think they're going to extend it again. So how can you, if you are a landlord and your tenant is in arrears right now and it's pretty serious and they're not making any attempt to get out of those arrears, how can you still recover that rent without going to court and applying for an eviction? Well, first of all, we have to remember that we can only not go to court right now for an eviction. We can still take steps and action to recover the rent, to recover the debt. And you kind of get where I'm going now. You can still instruct debt collectors on your behalf to go and chase that rent and to try and recover it. You can even do it yourself. You can actually submit a small claim online and recover the debt. Now, you won't be able to evict the tenant, right? Now, just a quick caveat to that, you will be able to apply to the courts if the tenant is conducting or committing antisocial behaviour. That's a different thing. Some could argue withholding rent is antisocial, but, technically not. Anyway, the point is, the debt and the eviction are two separate things now. So you can go to a debt collecting agency or something similar and have them chase the debt on your behalf. Now, what are the consequences for the tenant? If your tenant is just unwilling to pay their rent, right? And they're just racking up the debt, causing you to get into trouble yourself because you're not getting the income that's entitled to you, then the debt collector will go and try and recover the debt. They'll take a series of steps and work through a series of processes in order to try and recover it. And I've got a bit of info about due diligence on the debt collector as well. But they'll try and recover that debt for you. If they can't recover that debt, they will then take you through or take the tenant through the process of legal action to recover that debt. Because remember, you can take legal action to recover a debt. You can't take legal action right now to evict a tenant. So there's the key. Now, the consequences for the tenant is that the debt collector, the courts will then impose a county court judgment on that tenant. Now, that's pretty serious for a tenant, because the chances are they won't be able to rent another property from a landlord in the future. Or it will just be more difficult for them because they'll have to go through credit checks and referencing and vetting. And if they've now got a county court judgment because of rent arrears, then no one's going to want them to move into their property. Now, look, I'm trying not to be harsh here, because this might seem quite unethical and a bit immoral. But I don't know the circumstances of every tenant. What I'm trying to get at here are the tenants that are just unwilling to pay. They're taking advantage of this lockdown situation. They're taking advantage of this eviction ban, and they're sitting pretty, holding on to their money, loving life, because they don't have to pay any rent. And technically that's what's happening in a lot of cases. I've heard it so many times where the tenants are still working, still earning, still have an income, but just not paying rent and avoiding the landlord. How people can be like that is a totally different subject. Some human beings are just not worth the space that they're occupying in this world. However, I can't really comment on that because I don't know the circumstances of every tenant. I'm assuming that there are some tenants out there that are willing to pay their debts and want to just carry on and pay their debts. And if you're a landlord of one of those tenants, then look after them, because when we come out of all of this, they're going to be worth their weight in gold. Having a great tenant in place that's just having a difficulty along with the rest of the country is a good thing. Well, it's not a great thing for you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I get it, But all that's going to happen, if you've got a good tenant that would actually be paying no problem if they could work and earn, all that would happen is you evict them and then you get another tenant in that can't pay or doesn't pay later on down the line. You never know. Anyway, back to the subject. I don't know what goes on in my head. But it is the way it is, isn't it? But anyway, so what I guess I'm saying is I'm really targeting this at the tenants that just don't bother. That are happy for you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, to fall into debt yourself. Happy for you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, to make payments on, for them. Still pay your mortgage even though they're not bothering to pay the rent. They're not taking any kind of steps or action to try and pay the rent. Look, you can do anything. I've told you in a previous video, sorry, this is not for landlords, this is for tenants. But I've told tenants in previous videos that, the supermarkets are crying out for staff. The delivery companies are crying out for staff. You can go and work. If you really, really wanted to go and work, you can go and work. But I know how it is. You've been laid off your job or you've been furloughed or whatever, and it's a bit of a holiday. You're still earning. You can save money elsewhere and still pay your rent. That is a fact. But you know what? Some tenants, some people, some human beings are not like that. They'd much rather just let the debt build up, try and hide from it and cause everybody else inconvenience, problems, struggles and stress. They're happy for other people to do that so that they can try and keep hold of a little bit of money. But it always comes back to bite them in the arse at some point. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent again. What I was trying to get back to is that you can actually recover the debt. So my advice to you, if you've got a tenant that is just not bothering, they're able to earn and make and pay money, but they're just not bothering, they're taking advantage of you, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, then go to a debt collector and or you can submit the claim online yourself. I would go to a debt collector personally. We're anonymous, right? We're trying to be anonymous landlords. Let the debt collector do what they do best. Now, quick bit of due diligence on debt collectors. First of all, there are some debt collectors that will just chase the debt for a percentage of the debt. Now, I have found that they're pretty good because it costs you less money and they will just do whatever it takes to go after that debt. But they'll normally only go after that debt or take your case on if there's enough debt to make it worth their while. If they're only going to earn 20 quid, 30 quid out of it, yeah, probably not. But remember the rule in property investing, some money is better than no money, and certainly some money is better than losing money. So right now, if you're losing money, then we need to make sure we can get that debt back somehow. Now, another type of debt collector is, I don't know how to describe them other than a bit of a tick box debt collector. Now, I'm not saying they're bad, but what will inevitably happen, sometimes you might pay 100, 150 quid, whatever it might be, and that debt collector is maybe a phase 1 debt collector. They'll send 2 letters, 2 texts, 2 emails, and 1 visit, let's just say, for an example. Now, if that phase 1 that's cost you 150 quid doesn't work, you can then go on to phase 2, which might be 250 quid, where they'll have 3 visits and a court application, something like that. And then phase 3 is what it's, I don't know how much they cost, but then phase 3 is where they actually take the tenant to court, apply for repossession, all those things, right? So that's kind of what I would call a tick box debt collector. That's not the right terminology, that's just how I think of them. And then there's another debt collector that you pay for their time. I don't like those debt collectors because think about it. Their business and their incentive in business is to take up as much time as possible, right? So they're just going to keep taking as long as it takes, as long as possible to recover that debt while you're paying per hour, blah, 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 blah. I don't like those debt collectors. Hey, I'm happy to be corrected if those debt collectors are the best ones to use. Personally, I like the first 2 because you know what you're going to get. The first type of debt collector I mentioned, the percentage of debt guy or girl, is, I think, for me, it's a catch-22, isn't it? Because if they're charging a big chunk of your debt, you recover the debt, but you lose some of the debt. But some money's better than losing money. And the second type for me is probably the best, because you know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. You know how much you're going to pay at what stage. It might cost you 500 quid or whatever it's going to cost, but if you know that by the end of that 500 quid, you know that your debt is going to be recovered one way or another, maybe that's a good thing. So do remember that you can still recover the debt. You can still chase the debt, but you just can't do an eviction. You can't take an eviction at the moment. Now, how to approach that with your tenant is maybe something of a strategy, maybe a technique, right? So this is how I would do it. If I wasn't an anonymous landlord, then I'm doing this myself, and I'm trying to help the landlords out there that are DIY, do it yourself, self-managing, all on your own. That makes me shiver, by the way, but anyway, that's up to you, your choice. Not even just because of this subject, just because of the legislation that you're probably not following. You know, I did that interview with Des Taylor on a podcast, and he says quite rightly, every landlord is doing something wrong if they're doing it themselves. Every landlord. And I can't tell you enough the amount of landlords that I speak to that are DIY because they want to save a few quid, but end up spending loads of time getting it wrong. They're in danger of getting fined, penalised. Anyway, we won't go into that. That's another video. So, so anyway, if you are going to do this yourself, I don't know, you know me by now. Hey, do you know what? And when I do go off on those tangents, just stick with it, because sometimes I might come out with a freebie, another little nugget that you might be able to use somewhere down the line. I hope you enjoy my little tangents. I really do. It's the way I am. Everybody that knows me knows that that's the way I am. So anyway, yes, if you're going to do it yourself, if you are a DIY landlord and you're going to approach this with the tenant, the way I would do it is write to the tenant and write a letter just saying, nothing emotional, don't get into it, don't get aggressive or anything like that. You don't need to. Just say, dear Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, due to the arrears on the property or due to your rent arrears, something like that, I have decided to take action to recover the debt and use a debt recovery agent to act on my behalf, something along those lines. This may result in a CCJ being registered against you, which in turn will make it difficult for you to rent properties in the future. However, I will submit that instruction to the debt recovery agent on Friday. Between now and Friday, I will give you the opportunity to offer me a payment plan which is satisfactory to me. And if we can agree a payment plan in that meantime, I will not instruct the debt collector at that time. Something along those lines. You get what I'm saying? What you're basically saying is, I'm going to submit this to a debt collector on Friday. Between now and then, if you can agree or offer me a good debt recovery plan or a payment plan which works for us both, then I won't go to the debt collector and I won't take that action. Now, if your tenant does not respond to that, then go for it, because they're just not willing. Even if, right, what a lot of tenants may feel, if they're in debt, in arrears, their brain is saying, well, because I can't afford to pay the whole rent or the whole arrears, I can't afford to pay the arrears or anything. For some reason, tenants feel that when tenants are in arrears, something in their head tells them that because they can't pay the £2,000 arrears in one go, they can't pay anything. So you as the landlord have to prompt that tenant to say, how much can you pay? 100 quid. Give me something. Give me some sign that you are willing to get yourself out of this. Otherwise, I've got no choice, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, to take action. I've got to get my money because it's my money. Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, you wouldn't give money to people. You wouldn't just go out onto the streets and say, here goes somebody I don't know. Here's £800 and come back next month, I'll give you another £800. No, it doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that, but yet tenants seem to feel that they're entitled for a landlord to do that. I just don't get it. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent. So that's the way I would do it. Write a letter, explaining that on such and such date, you are going to submit an an instruction to a debt recovery agent to recover the arrears on your behalf. You will then say, I will not be open to any communication about it thereafter. The debt recovery agent will be completely authorised to act on my behalf, 100%. Now, once you've sent that letter, send them a text because you've probably got the mobile number. Send them an email because hopefully you've got their email too. Just saying to them, I have sent you a letter in the post. Please respond. I'll speak to you soon. Blah, blah, blah. Love you. No, don't write love you at the end. So now you've got that letter out. You've got that text and email out. You now have a debt and a date and a deadline. That's what you've got to stick to. Always do what you say you are going to do. That's not just a rule in being a landlord. That's a rule in life. If you say you're going to do something, do it. So, look, hopefully then that gives you a bit of a heads up or hand in recovering that debt. Look, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, please don't just accept no money. Don't accept that you've lost money. The first rule in investment, especially property investment, is don't lose money. If you're going to lose money, go and get it back. You're entitled to it. It's yours. It's just not fair that a tenant is able to get away with not paying the rent. They signed a contract. They committed to it. They agreed to it. They have to pay it. So I want you to recover that debt. So if you're in that problem, you're in that situation and you need some help, please don't feel like you're on your own. I really am here to help you. Just give me a call or an email, tom@pinkstreet.co.uk. Do something and I will help you out. I will do my best to not let these dodgy tenants, look, I'm not talking about the good tenants. I'm not talking about the tenants that want to do well and try. I'm talking about the, for want of a better word, the idiot tenants who just think they can sponge off landlords. I just think that's unfair. And it doesn't even matter if you're a landlord who is super wealthy. That doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, if you're super wealthy, you've probably earned that. If you're not super wealthy, you've got one property, you've probably earned that. You are entitled to receive income. You can guarantee that that dodgy tenant who's trying to sponge a load of money off you, you can guarantee that they take their money, that when they go and do some work, if they go and do some work, that they get paid for it. And if their employer withholds their money, you can guarantee they kick off. And that's just the way life is. It's so frustrating. They'll, on one hand, really dig at and criticize and be horrific towards a landlord because the landlord is trying to get the money that's entitled to them. But try and take money from them, oh no, oh goodness me, you hear them scream and rant and rave, effing and blinding. Look, hey, if any letting agents are listening to this, then you know what I mean. You know those tenants. As soon as you start messing around with their money, in their eyes, they become vile. And those are the tenants that I'm trying to stop. And you know what I really would love? Maybe I will. I'm going to start a campaign against bad tenants because there are good people out there that rent property, good tenants that just fall into financial difficulty. And if you're a tenant and you're listening to this, you are who I love. Even if you are a good tenant that has had a struggle financially, maybe you lost your job, maybe you're made redundant, maybe something else happened, but you're a good tenant, you're trying, you're keeping in touch with the landlord, you're keeping every single penny that you can, you're trying to pay your rent to keep the roof over your head, you're doing what you can. You are the tenants that deserve our property. You're the tenants that landlords are looking for because, look, people do get into financial difficulty. And when you're a good tenant, you're a good tenant. And it's not about how much you earn. It's about your mentality. It's about if you are driven to pay your rent, if you are dedicated to pay your rent, no matter what, and you lose your job, you'll go and get a job, you'll do what you can, you'll borrow here, you'll do what you can to pay your rent because you're a good person. But if you're a bad tenant, and if you're a tenant listening to this and you're a bad tenant who, as soon as times get tough, maybe you've been out on the weekend, spent a bit more money than you should have done, you can't afford your rent now on Monday, you just won't pay it. It's not the landlord's problem, bad tenant, it's your problem. You need to grow up and you need to pay your rent and your other bills, especially if you've got children in the house. What lesson are you teaching those children if you just don't pay the rent and don't pay your way, don't contribute in life? This has turned into a bit of a rant, hasn't it? I really feel strongly about bad tenants. I absolutely despise tenants that feel it's their entitlement not to pay their rent if they've got a good landlord. Now, don't get me started on good and bad landlords. Bad landlords really piss me off because they have ruined things for the rest of us on numerous occasions. I think I'll do a whole video on bad landlords because I heard a story the other day about a really bad landlord who put a really good family of tenants through absolute hell because he's a tight, stingy, bad landlord. So I'm going to do a video on that. I'll share that story with you. Actually, I might make a podcast out of that one on the Anonymous Landlord podcast. We'll see. Anyway, that has turned into a rant. I don't mind that. It's always good to get these thoughts out. And again, those that know me, you know by now, I very rarely stay on that one subject. But if you listen to it carefully, you might pick out some good little gems of information there. Right. Go and get a debt collector if you have a bad tenant that is unwilling to pay their rent and they're in arrears. Go and get a debt collector, submit a court claim. But look, all that's happened is you can't evict them. Remember, the eviction ban is the eviction ban. There's not a debt collecting ban. So go and get your debt. If you're entitled to that money, go and get it. It's yours. Now, look, would you do me a favour, everybody? I need your help. I've just set myself a ridiculous target this week, and it's bearing in mind it's August 24th. Is it 24th? Yeah, August 24th. And I want to hit 1,000 downloads this week of my podcast. Now, bearing in mind it's a relatively new podcast, but there's tons of episodes on there already. As you can tell, I quite enjoy doing this. I need your help. Forgive me for asking, but I'm giving you a lot of stuff here for free. I've got this knowledge over 20 odd years. I've rented, I've let and managed thousands of properties. I've sourced thousands of property investments for my clients. I've worked hard at this, and I'm giving all of this information, advice, tips, rants, info, opinions for free. This takes me a lot of time to do all of this stuff. So would you mind if I just asked you one simple thing which costs you nothing? If you see an Anonymous Landlord podcast, advert or post or episode or something like that, would you please share it? Just please. And look, I'm not telling you that anything terrible is going to happen if you don't. There's no incentive for you to do it other than you're just helping me out. You're helping me try and reach my goals. I've got a strategy where I really want to get that podcast going, and it seems to be doing really well so far. So that's my goal. I'd love it if I could just do that podcast full time along with the property investing and, you know, all of those things. That'd be so much fun. I'd love that. So if you could help me, brilliant. Hey, I'm just a local guy who's trying to make my way in the world. So any help you can give me along the way would really be appreciated. It's the Anonymous Landlord podcast. And hey, do you know what? We can all improve ourselves, right? We can always be better landlords. We can always be better tenants. We can always be better people. We can always be better investors. But in order to be the best version of yourself at one thing, you've got to be the best version of yourself at everything. And that is a mentality shift, not a strategy shift. Start making yourself better because you can do it. And you can always do better. So anyway, my name's Tom Soane and this is the Anonymous Landlord.